Okay, so we're going to set up simple domain sharing, and I thought it'd be easier to kind of lay this out graphically before we go ahead and do it. Currently, we have the MX record pfslab.com pointed to our internal EC2 Amazon Lab environment to a Exchange Mail server called pfslabmail.pfslab.com, and we're going to be using the AgeRayer account. Now, on this lab environment, AgeRayer has a UPN or Active Directory user, AgeRayer at pfslab.local, and it also has an email address, AgeRayer at pfslab.com, so it can receive internet mail. Our Outlook desktop application is going to be connected to this mailbox on the external Exchange server. We also have an AgeRayer at pfslab01.onmicrosoft.com user provisioned in our Office 365 environment, and it has an alias AgeRayer at pfslab.com. So this alias here matches this email address here, which is okay for this simple domain sharing, but when we get to IMAP, we'll see that that's going to cause a problem. And it's okay here because we're not forwarding to AgeRayer at pfslab.com. We're going to set up forwarding to the onmicrosoft.com address, so this really won't come into play until we go and send email. Okay, so let's go ahead and do it. First thing I want to do is I want to show you the changes I made before we started this, just to save some time. I went ahead and changed the MX record back to our internal mail server because it was set to the Office 365 mail server when we set this up. When we did the DNS verification, we did change the MX record. I went ahead and changed it back to match a real-world scenario where we've added our custom domain to Office 365, but we have not redirected mail flow through changing the MX record. I did, however, include in the SPF record both the local mail server and the Office 365 because we will be sending email from this address. I'm not sure if it's necessary, but I went ahead and did it anyway. And I changed the -all to $all, and in Objective 2.1 we'll get into SPF, but this probably could have stayed as a minus sign, but just to be safe, I changed it to a question mark, which means neutral all. So in short, if anything doesn't match either of these two, then it isn't explicitly denied or accepted. It's just whatever the client is set up to do. Okay, and this MX record obviously is going to need an IP address, so there's a DNS record, there's an A record for PFSLab mail pointing to the external IP of our Exchange server. All right, let's go in here. And lastly, I have a Gmail account that I set up called pfslab01@gmail.com. And we'll use this for sending and receiving emails to external accounts so we can see what it looks like with mail flowing inside and outside of the organization. So we're just going to do a quick NS lookup. I want to make sure that we have the MX record set up correctly. Query type equals MX for pfslab.com, and we get that it's pfslabmail.pfslab.com, and here's the external IP. So it looks like that is set up correctly. We'll just do another one on the TXT record. And we have PFS. Oh, that's wrong. Good thing I caught that. It should be PFSLab mail. So let's go ahead and change that. With the question mark, it really didn't matter, but I'm just trying to be as thorough as possible here in case a client decides that it wants to reject any mail from this because it doesn't have a valid SPF record. Okay, that could take some time to propagate, but we'll move on for now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to send an email without having done anything to pfslab.com. Test from Gmail. Can't type. This is a test. And if we open up the Outlook desktop app, yep, it came in. And if we look at the header here, we can see that it was received by pfsmail.pfslocal.com. This is the internal IP, not the external, but that's okay. So we know that we are using the internal Exchange server to send mail, and then I can just do a quick reply. Got it. We should see that flow in. Yes, we did. It came from me, which was adreyer@pfslab.com. Show original message. We see that this did indeed come from pfslabmail.com. So we know mail is flowing to and from our internal Exchange server, and then our Outlook desktop application is connected to our internal Exchange server. Okay, so let's go ahead and sign in to Office 365. We're just going to come here. We're going to verify that we have the correct aliases set up. Okay, so this username is adreyer@pfslab. So not only is it have an alias set up, but that alias is set as the default. And if we go to our mailbox for this account, we can see I do have some test messages in here, but that email we sent is not here. So this is a separate mailbox. Even though it's configured with the same email address, it did not receive the email we sent because the MX record is pointing to the internal Exchange server, and it got delivered to an internal mailbox, not the online mailbox. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, and let me move this out of the way, is we're going to open up a new window. We're going to browse to our internal Exchange server /ECP. Let me sign out and sign back in. So if you're not familiar with Exchange 2013, there's no more Exchange Management Center, I think it was. It's all done through the web, which is nice because it means you can access it from any machine. That doesn't have to be from the Exchange server itself. It can all be done through HTML. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to forward email that's sent to this address to adreyer@pfslab01.onmicrosoft.com. And the way we do forwarding is we come down to the mailbox, we'll edit the mailbox, we'll go to mailbox features, and we'll come down to mail flow. If we say enable forwarding, you'll notice here that we only have the option of adding users that are set up. We can't add to an external SMTP account. You could if you wanted to use PowerShell, but we need to create a mail contact for the adreyer@onmicrosoft.com before we can enable forwarding. And then we have the option of delivering it to both or just forwarding it and not delivering it locally. But we're going to leave it as delivered to both right now. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to come over to contacts. We're going to add a contact. We'll call this Adam Dreyer Online, AJD Online. Oops. Well, actually, let's leave it. The first name is Adam, and the last name is Dreyer Online. There we go. Actually, I don't need initials. There we go. Alias, AD Online. And we'll say that this is adreyer@pfslab01.onmicrosoft.com. What OU do we want? This is actually going to create a contact user in Active Directory, so if we wanted to, we could browse through the Active Directory environment. I don't have any OU set up, so users is fine. And we'll hit save. Now if we come back to mailboxes and we go to Adam Dreyer, we come down to mailbox features and delivery options, we should now be able to forward to that mail contact, AD Online. Okay. And we'll save that. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come down to mail flow. We're going to see accepted domains. We're going to come to accepted domains, and we're going to edit this just to show you. Right now it's set to authoritative. Emails delivered only to valid recipients in this Exchange organization. All emails for unknown recipients is rejected. So what this is saying is that if it accepts an email on behalf of pfslab.com, it is going to assume that it knows about all the users locally. And if it doesn't know about a user, it's going to issue a non-delivery report. It's going to reject the message. If we set this to internal relay, that means that Exchange is admitting that there are other systems out there that use pfslab.com as a valid email domain, So we're going to forward it to another server. And eventually it has to wind up at an authoritative server that can say, yes, I know about this account, or no, I don't know about this account. If you set two different servers to internal relay, there's a possibility that they could end up forwarding back and forth to each other forever in a loop. So we don't want to do that. And in this case, we don't need to set this to internal relay because we're going to be forwarding to the onmicrosoft.com address. So we're not actually forwarding outside of the domain. We're not going to be routing mail to PFS Lab addresses that are outside of this Exchange server. So we can leave this as authoritative for now. We don't have to make any changes. And our send connector is just the all internet enabled, so no special send connector set up here either. If we jump down to Active Directory, users, we can see, I'm going to need to refresh this. There we go, refresh. We have this Adam Dreher Online mail contact now, so that was created just now. Okay, one or two other things we have to do is we have to come into our Office 365 environment, and we're going to go back to our Exchange Admin Center. This is our local one. We don't want that one. So here is a bit different because what we need to do for the online exchange is we need to do two things. We'll come down to Mailflow and accepted domains. Okay, so I have this domain set to internal relay. I did that before. I shouldn't have. I should have left it as authoritative so I could show you that we have to change this to internal relay. So normally this would have been set as authoritative, and we change it to internal relay. And why is this? Well, as I explained before, if you set it to authoritative, it's going to think it knows about every single user. So if a pilot user tries to send email to a user who's not in the pilot and who's on the internal Exchange server, though that user may or may not have a user account in Office 365. If it doesn't have a user account in Office 365, but the PFS Lab is set to authoritative in Exchange Online, then Office 365 and Exchange Online will assume that that is a invalid username and that mailbox doesn't exist and reject it. By setting up internal relay, we're saying that Exchange Online should know that they're not authoritative for this particular domain name, and there could be another mail server that email has to be forwarded to if they're not aware of who the user is. Well, how does it normally find this? And if we set it to internal relay, it should tell us, hey, you're going to need a send connector. Okay, so it says that there's no outbound connector to deliver mail for this domain. Make sure there's an outbound connector of type on-premise that matches every internal relay accepted. So what it's basically saying is if you set this to internal relay, it knows that you're saying you may have to forward mail to another server, and to do that, you need to create a connector for it. But we don't need to, and the reason why we don't need to is because the MX record is still pointing to the on-premise environment. So Office 365 or Exchange Online can say, hey, I know this should go to another pfslab.com email server. Where do I send it to? Well, it can look up the MX record, and it could send it to the authoritative server per the DNS MX record. Now, if we had MX records pointed to Office 365, but we still had some mailboxes on the on-premise Exchange, then we'd have to set up a connector to the on-premise Exchange because otherwise it would not know where to route those PFS Lab mail addresses to. But since we have that MX record, we don't actually have to set up an internal connector. We could, but we don't have to. So one thing I forgot to mention is you may want to create a connection filter in your Exchange Online environment to whitelist or allow the on-premise Exchange server to send mail without having to be filtered for viruses or malware. And this is because you assumingly already have some sort of protection or filtering on your existing email, and when those messages are forwarded from your on-premise environment, you don't want them to be processed again for viruses and wind up with emails being quarantined or rejected for any particular reason. So in order to do that, you would come down to protection, you would go over to connection filter, and then you would edit the default connection filter to allow for an IP address. And in this case, we would use the external IP address of the on-premise Exchange server. That way we can ensure that all messages make it to the Office 365 environment and none get rejected. Because again, now we're going to try to stop using the on-premise or legacy email server and move forward using only the Office 365. So we can't have any kind of bottlenecks or any kind of blockages in that mail flow. So while we're still have the MX record pointed to the legacy or on-premise Exchange server, we need to guarantee that that email makes it to Office 365. So we whitelist that Exchange server here so nothing gets blocked. All right, so that's really it. Now, if we come into our, let's do a test from Gmail, and we'll write another test to adreyer@pfslab.com. And we'll say, is forwarding working? Testing, testing. We don't get any rejects. So what should happen is it should be delivered to the on-premise Exchange, which again our Outlook desktop app has. So we know it's being delivered locally to the internal Exchange server. And if we go into our online server and our Outlook Online, it should have been forwarded to the .onmicrosoft.com address, and so we're now receiving it as well in our Office 365 environment. And boy, is this slow today, huh? Okay, so there we go. So we know it's being delivered. Now, what happens if we try to reply to this and send something back to this Gmail address? Well, first let's take a look at who it's from. And it's already set up as adreyer@pfslab.com. That's our only option because we had set this domain to default. Now let's send it. So is it being sent back to the internal mail server? No, it's going out through the egress or the Office 365 external mail servers. So it's really leaving from the Office 365 environment and the Office 365 mail servers, which is why we wanted to include that in our SPF records. So if it's coming from there, what's it going to show up as the from address? Well, if we come back into our Gmail account, we see here it says Adam Dreyer via pfslab01.onmicrosoft.com. So when Office 365 does not have the MX record set up pointing to it, and it has to send from a domain that it's not authoritative for, it will show it as a via. And this may be acceptable for you, maybe it's not acceptable for you. That's really your determination to make. But if you don't want this, and you want to send from Office 365 without having a via, then you have to change the MX record, which means you have to have all the mail flow through the through Exchange Online, which means it has to be fully migrated. The other thing I want to show you here is that if we come to Sent Items, we don't have that in Sent Items. So because that was sent from Office 365, it went into the Sent Items folder in Office 365, and that does not sync back here. So we see that incoming mail is forwarded from the local Exchange to the Exchange Online mailbox, but sent items are not synchronized or forwarded back and forth anywhere. Which means that once we make this change to simple domain sharing, we can keep the MX record on premise, but we A, have to start using the Office 365 mailbox for all our incoming and outgoing mail. B, the email sent from that account will show via pfslab01.onmicrosoft.com, so it'll show the tenant name. And C, at some point we may need to migrate the contents of the mailbox from the on-premise Exchange server into the Office 365 server if we want to have one mailbox that has all the mail in it historically. Oh, the last thing I wanted to show you was the internal relay working. So if we come back to our Office 365 mailbox, and we'll create a new email, we'll send this to Barry Burrito, who's an online user. I'm sorry, he's a on-premise user, and we'll say is internal relay working. Test, test. Now, if Exchange Online had pfslab.com set to authoritative, and since there's no user named Barry Burrito in the Office 365 tenant, it would reject it. But because we changed it from authoritative to internal relay, it's going to do a lookup on the MX record for pfslab.com, determine that it should be forwarded to the PFSLab mail server, which is the internal server, and then it's going to forward it to Barry Burrito's premise account. And here I'm just in the OWA mailbox, and we see here that on the internal mail server, it was delivered to the local user Barry Burritos account. So we know that internal relay is working, and any emails sent from the Office 365 environment to pfslab.com users who aren't provisioned in the tenant will be forwarded to the internal mail server. So that's simple domain sharing. Next, we'll look at IMAP.